For our start, I'm going to use 2 strands of this 110 bar 2 Tex yarn. It's a nice space dyed yarn, hand dyed. It's pure New Zealand merino wool with 80% wool and 20% nylon, so it is actually a sock yarn. Now, because we've got yarn that's dyed, or maybe we'd be using yarn of 2 different colours, if we pull 2 strands just straight off 2 cones off the floor and through the machine, you'll quite often get one strand looping because one may be a different yarn and it may run at slightly different speed to the other yarn, and you get into all sorts of trouble. So what we're going to do is wrap that yarn, and all we've got to do is take the bottom cone through one of the holes in the bottom of the machine. We drop it into the centre of the second cone, and we pull it through, which is very easy in this case. So we've got one yarn coming up through the centre, and we find the end for our yarn on that cone, and we bring it up. The reason that we've brought one yarn up through the centre is that as the second yarn, or the top cone, is going, it's wrapping around, and it doesn't look like it, but it actually is wrapping around that yarn, and it keeps those yarns even. There are holes on the left or right hand side to put your yarn in. I don't personally bother with them, I just come up through the centre. I find that quite often there are little snags on those holes and they take an awful long time to wear in, so for the purposes of this demo with a new machine and a fairly new yarn mast, I'm going to just come up through the centre Y. We thread through the top slot under the little yellow lifter, so your yarn is coming under that yellow lifter and down through the middle. We then need to bring the crank around to the right, probably round the back, and pull about, in your language, a yard of yarn, a yard and a half of yarn through the guide and down into your yarn carrier. We've got about a yard and a half of yarn coming out from the guide, and we go down through the slot in the yarn carrier, yarn guide, sorry, yarn carrier, I can't remember which, doesn't matter, round and round the piggy tail. It's about 3.5 turns until the yarn is in the centre of the piggy tail and moving freely. Because we've assembled this machine from scratch, we're going to have to do some tension adjustment. Really, the rule of thumb is screw the tension knob, and by holding the 2 sides of the tension cam down, if you only hold one side you'll just jam it and it's very hard to get down, but you'll work that one out. Just screw that knob down fairly well to the bottom, and that's going to give us a very loose tension, but that's going to stop jam ups when you try and cast on with the cast on basket. If your tension's too tight, your yarn's too thick, a whole lot of things are going to combine to absolutely frustrate you in getting past first base and casting on and knitting some tubes. So very important to get that tension down. The dreaded cast on basket. This is the bane of a lot of people's existence, I know, and there are several methods of casting on, but once you get used to your basket, it's very, very easy. The basket's got a long handle. Drop it down in the centre of the machine, holding the handle with your other hand, and you've got your yarn through the guide, down into the basket, up over the first tine and over the first needle, round the back of the needle, round the tine on the basket, round the back, round the tine, round the back, round the tine. You get very, very fast, down to about 10 seconds once you get good at it, round the tine, round the basket. Doesn't matter if it's not quite even into the centre, we can sort all that out once we start knitting. Now we've run out of needles, so we actually have to start knitting. The yarn isn't going to pick up the first needle, it's not going to pick up until the second needle, so that first stitch will drop off. That doesn't matter. Round we go. We've got a couple of stitches on. We're now going to finish around the last few needles that have now raised up. Okay, we've now cast on. Right, we're now going to hang our weight. You can see that the hook of the basket is out underneath, and we hang our weight holder there, and I like to put on all the weights. Done deal. Right, we're going to knit 1 or 2 rows, or half a dozen rows. And you're going to find now all of a sudden it's knitting tight on that side and not on this side, and this yarn is all about to bunch up. You can see that the cast on basket has all of a sudden gone on an angle, and that there is no tension on those stitches. Now if I do any more rows, those stitches are all going to come off, and our cast on, which looks pretty perfect at this stage, is going to be wrecked. So all you have to do is take the handle of the cast on basket and just manipulate it over. What's happened is the ledge of the cast on basket has caught on the ledge that screws the cylinder in, so it's just sitting there on that ledge. Now do a few more rows and you'll see that our tension is right now, and our cast on basket has now cleared the bottom of the machine, and we're away. Now, looking at the gaps in those stitches, because we're setting this up with every other needle for a 1-in-1 rib, that tension is far too loose. We can now start to screw our, we'll get round the front, screw our tension knob up, and just go up 1 or 2 full turns at a time, and you see those stitches have come closer, and my yarn is getting tighter. Now that's a little bit tight, so back down 1 full turn, I think, and we'll probably get somewhere about where we should be for a reasonably nice rib. So we've cast on there pretty well, we're pretty right for our rib. We'll just make sure that our yarn guide's tight, and it's not too bad, and so we're going to place our ribber in. Looking at the stopper at the bottom of the ribber, place your ribber in and just get that stopper before the stopper post that's sitting down in the machine. So we're going to put our ribber in, our stopper's placed a little bit away, and couple of cranks to bring the drive pin round. This is the drive pin. Yep. And so we start driving what we call the tappet plate. The needle slots are not lining up with the needles in the cylinder, so we have to adjust the ribber. So holding the dial, we're going to adjust that guide back until we have a blank slot facing a blank slot in the cylinder. So just to make it very clear, I adjusted this dial by holding the dial so that the stopper is against the ribber post, and I adjusted it using that knob. So my suggestion is, before you actually start knitting, just play around with adjusting that. Now there are 1 or 2 other little rules. Do not crank your machine fast when you have needles in and the yarn guide on. If you want to crank your machine fast, take the yarn guide off, because what happens is latches without yarn on them fly up and they catch in the yarn guide and they break. The other no-no is never, ever, and I mean never, crank your machine backwards. Do not go backwards, because you will, if it's got needles in it, you will immediately jam the needles in the side cams and you'll virtually have to dismantle the machine. The only time you ever crank backwards is when you've got half your needles out of work and you are doing a heel. If when you get your machine, your side cams, which are around here somewhere, and I'm going to have to adjust that, your side cams have come up and ridden up in transit and travelled up, just get a little screwdriver and just tap them down until they fall back into position, and you should be pretty right.